Okay, here you go. Here's a quick screencast of the Bounds of Thinkable Thought. I will not be able to go through the entire article, but I certainly will be able to give you some of it. Okay, sorry, I had my screen closed there, my camera closed. So he begins with a story about Vladimir Danchev and calls him really courageous and recognizes that in the West, meaning in the United States and other Western European countries, that in this former dictatorship in the Soviet Union, it was really amazing that this guy Danchev was courageous enough to stand up and warn the Afghanistani people that his country was going to come and invade them. In the Soviet Union, they said, oh, we didn't punish him because he's sick, and they all know this is the way dictatorships work. He goes on to say, perhaps the most amazing thing about it is that that he called it for resistance to it, but that he called it an invasion. And he sort of snarkily says, in the Soviet theology, there is no such thing. Rather, there is a Russian defense of Afghanistan bandits operating in Pakistani sanctuaries. So his snark here is that in the former Soviet Union, being a dictatorship, they were not allowed to have any religion in that country. But he said, oh, they had a religion. And the religion was that the Soviet Union is always good. The Soviet Union never invades somebody. So if an enormous country like the Soviet Union happens to have troops in a teeny little country like Afghanistan and seems to be there, and you're trying to figure out why they're there, they can't be hurting or invading. They must be defending. We are there helping them. And it's one of those things that if you were to say, are you sure we're helping? I said we're helping, and then you say something else and you end up in the torture chamber until you agree that they are there helping. He goes on to say that implicit in the coverage of the situation was a note of self-congratulation, like, oh, in America, you never get sent to a mental hospital for this. We have the First Amendment. We're free to criticize our government. He goes on to say, we might, however, inquire further into why this just has never happened. One possibility is the question has never arisen because no American journalist would ever mimic Danchev's courage or could even perceive that an American invasion of the Afghan type is in fact an invasion, or that a sane person might call on the victims to resist. If this were the case, it would signify a stage of indoctrination well beyond any achieved under Soviet terror, well beyond anything Orwell imagined. And what he's arguing is that in essence, in the United States, that we are, in his phrase, brainwashed under freedom in not a terribly different way than they are in the Soviet Union. And it begins with probably a generally healthy patriotism sort of gone wild, that people get to the point where they don't think that our country could ever really do anything that's wrong. And if you want to feel some of that cognitive dissonance for a second, just imagine going on the morning announcements yourself when the United States has gotten into a war where it doesn't belong and saying, not only am I saying the United States is wrong, but I'm saying the people of country X should shoot back and defend themselves. And people would say, are you telling the enemy to shoot at our troops? Because that's what Danchev did. And when Danchev did it, we said he was a hero and that he was standing up. The question is, can you do it here? And you might say, well, the United States doesn't invade other countries the way they do. And he would say, well, that's part of the bounded thought also. He uses as his main example Vietnam. Now, he starts in 1962, but he does mention 1954 down here, just to briefly introduce you to what's going on there. France held a colony in Vietnam, and in 1945, after Ho Chi Minh fought with us, meaning he fought with us against the Japanese, we encouraged the French to take their colony back. The French were fighting Ho Chi Minh, who was fighting for freedom for all of Vietnam. There was no such thing as South Vietnam. And he ended up defeating the French. We were paying the French. The French in 1954 spent $5 billion on a war in Vietnam to hold their colony. We had paid them 4 of those $5 billion, or 80%. In 1954, after Ho Chi Minh won the election, his first demand was that, he won the war, was that we have an election, which we absolutely refused. We told him, you go to the north, we'll make a separate government in the south, and in 2 years, in 1956, we promise you can have an election. Now, he was very resistant to this because he said there is no North and South Vietnam, there's just Vietnam, but he agreed and said, okay. The guy that we put in charge in the South, and I say we put him in charge because he got more votes than there were voters. He clearly just stuffed the ballot boxes and took charge. And as it actually turns out, later in 1963, this guy's name is DM, when even he is sickened by how many people are being killed in Vietnam and wants to make peace with what's then, by then, the North Vietnamese. Generals from South Vietnam come to the CIA and tell that they want to kill him because he's going to make peace, and Kennedy gives the okay. So basically, we put him in charge and had him thrown out. Nonetheless, 1956 comes along. They refuse to have an election, and a war then breaks out. Like the South try to overthrow this corrupt government. The North and the South start fighting. So consider the following facts. In 1962, President Kennedy sent the U.S. Air Force to attack rural South Vietnam. By the way, that's the side that we're on. We are on the southern side, where more than 80% of the population lived as part of a program intended to drive several million people into concentration camps called strategic hamlets, where they were surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards and, quote, protected from the guerrillas whom we conceded they were willingly supporting. These strategic hamlets, the idea of this was when you're fighting a guerrilla war, when people don't want you in their country and they're farmers for 1 minute and then they're soldiers the next, the idea was everybody has to move into our concentration camps. If you don't move into the concentration camps, you're the enemy and we can kill you. We borrowed this from the Spanish, who did it to the Cubans in the Spanish-American War. Nonetheless, by this time, there's already 75,000 people dead. And he goes on to say, here, for the past 22 years, so this was written a long time ago, I've been searching for some reference in mainstream journalism or scholarship to an American invasion of South Vietnam in 1962, or ever, or an American attack against South Vietnam, or an American aggression in Indochina, without success. There is no such event in history. Rather, there is an American defense of South Vietnam against terrorists supported from outside, namely from Vietnam. Meaning that the people that we were killing and didn't like were the ones who wanted to elect somebody we didn't like. And the parallel is there. He says, just like in the Soviet Union, in the United States, we have a similar thing. And the question is, how does it get this way? And he said the way it gets this way is we get into this weird debate between what he calls the hawks and the doves, which he said is sort of a pseudo debate. And in this pseudo debate, I will show you in a second. Okay, this might sound really silly, but this is where I start the pseudo debate because I think it's a little easier for people to see. And the argument goes like this. I go to a kindergarten classroom and I bring in two speakers. And if I'm really evil, I make them women. And the first speaker says this: "Good morning, boys and girls. We're all going to do a lot of learning this year, but boys learn a little bit faster than girls do. So really, they should learn in a separate room and girls should get their room." And then the other debater says, "Look, I agree that boys learn faster than girls, but we can all learn in the same room together. Boys are going to learn faster and we need a separate room for the girls. No, we can all learn together." And they debate this back and forth as if these are the only two legitimate positions. And the reason that you have a debate like this in front of little kids is not to actually give them a choice, but it's to indoctrinate them, to force something into their head. And instead of just saying what you think, you assume it to be true. And what I've assumed to be true in this example, if I can make this work, which apparently I can't, there is this. I've assumed that boys are smarter than girls. There we go. I've assumed that boys are smarter than girls. So, and these are bounds that I've put up. I make it as if the entire debate is this, that the only question is whether you can be in the same room together. And this are the real positions. Now, I don't even think this is a real debate. But in other words, if I was trying to hammer this into their heads, that's what I'm doing. So you've created this bounded thought, whereas if there are some girls who are walking around saying, we can learn in the same room together and think that they've empowered themselves, you've kind of tricked them into accepting that they're dumb. So this is similar to what he says goes on in this world. The debate pitted the hawks, so I'm right here. The debate pitted the hawks against the doves. The hawks were those like Joseph Alsop, who felt that with sufficient exercise of violence, we could succeed in our aims. The doves felt this was unlikely, although Mr. Schlesinger explained, we all pray Mr. Alsop will be right. So let's think about these two different positions here. Position one says, we can win this war. Position two says, well, we fought really hard and valiantly, but we are unlikely to win, and it's really just costing too much. So listen to what they're really saying. This is a good war and we can win. This is a good war and we can't win. This is a good war and we can win. This is a good war and we can't win. And in essence, the argument is just the same, that what you are assuming to be true is that the war is moral and worth winning. What Danchev said is, when these Soviet troops were going into Afghanistan, you should not want to win. We are oppressing these people. We are doing something horrible to them and they should fight back. No one in the United States is saying that. So, sort of in my metaphor here, instead of having a debate between black and white, the war is moral and we should fight, and it's not, we get a debate between black and gray. Well, of course the war is moral, and of course what we're doing is just. It's just a matter of whether we can win or not. And he says the more you hear this driven into your head, and then you use something really condescending, like if I'm the teacher and I'm having this debate in my classroom back in 1968, and kids are saying this, and then some kid pipes up and says, look, we shouldn't be in the war at all. I use this tone. I say, look, Bob, uh, I'm trying to have a debate here, and if you want to participate, that's fine. But if you're going to say irrational and emotional things, I'm going to have to ask you to step outside the classroom, as if his opinion is just completely unacceptable. So that is a very fast explanation of theoretically what is going on in that article. I've left off a lot of the details here and there, but hopefully that gives you enough to understand it.